Hi, I'm Scott Holmes, District Superintendent in Louisiana for the Assemblies of God Churches. We want to welcome you to Leadership U. It's our monthly video podcast aimed at you church leaders to help enrich and expand your leadership. We want to do all we can to help you do what God's called you to do, where He's called you to do it. So we hope this month's video podcast enriches your leadership. God bless you.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Philip Deas, lead pastor at North Point Community Church, and today I want to talk with you about culture. I grew up playing sports from the time I was a little boy and had a chance to play in high school and then go on to play football in college. And there's one thing that I learned, and that is that every team has a culture, but the culture has the team. You see, the culture is either holding you back or it's pushing you forward. The culture is either strengthening the team or the culture is weakening the team. You see, while every team has a culture, the truth is that the culture really does have the team, because the team cannot excel beyond the limitations of their culture. The culture is defined as the way of thinking, the way of behaving, or the way of working that exists in a place or an organization. You see, there is a way of thinking, a way of behaving, and a way of working that creates the atmosphere, it creates the environment. And I believe that's why Paul tells us in Romans 12, verse 2, he says, "Don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." He was saying that there is a culture of the world, there is an old culture that you need to get rid of, and you do that by having your thoughts changed, changing the way that you think. Changing the way that you think is going to change the way that you live. Changing the way that you live is going to change the way that you talk. And this forms the culture that we have in our lives, in our organizations, in our families, and in our homes. You see, you can either create culture intentionally or accidentally. You can create it by design or by default. But make no mistake about it, either way, culture is being created. You see, you can determine what the culture is going to be, or you can just let the culture form on itself. And if you let it form by itself, it might not be everything you want it to be. So why don't you make the decision that I'm going to create culture by design? I refuse to let culture be formed by default, because I'm not speaking into culture, because I'm not creating it. I don't want culture just happening around me. I want to be happening to my culture, because just like on a sports team, there will be a culture in your church, but the reality is that the culture will have your church. The culture is what will set the limitations for your church, or what will be the springboard or the launching pad for your church. And today I want to give you a few essential elements to creating culture in your church. The first element that I want to talk to you about is a vision or a mission statement. Our mission statement at North Point Community Church is creating Christ-centered, culture-changing community. It's something that we talk about all the time. It's something that I have the congregation say as long as I say it, because we believe that it is so important. It is the mission that God has given us, and it speaks to so many things. It speaks to the fact that we have to create this. It's not just going to happen because we love Jesus. It's not going to happen just because we show up. If we want to be Christ-centered, and if we want to change culture, we are going to have to create that, and that means it's going to take work. We talk about creating Christ-centered. You know, being Christ-centered doesn't just happen because you attend church on Sunday morning or you go to Sunday school. You must bring Christ into the center of your home, into the center of your workplace, and that takes attention to detail, and it takes work every day. And we talk about we want to be a culture-changing community. And we know if we're going to change the community, the first culture that has to change is the culture in our own hearts and the culture in our families. So we are are very intentional about changing culture. That is our mission. The second thing that I want to talk to you about, it's an essential element, and that is core values. You see, your core values are what support your mission statement, and they shape the culture of your organization. They are so important. They are like setting up the parameters, the barriers, if you would. They are the things that you establish on the foundation that build what you are trying to build there in your organization. They are the principles that guide all of your organization's actions. Core values are so important. And then the next thing is going to be your practices. Your practices. So you have to put your core values into operation. You have to make sure that your core values aren't something that just sit on a shelf. Your core values must be able to be translated or transferred to good ideas into actual practices in your life. And so what we did at North Point is we took our core values and we took the practices and we kind of meshed them together, so we came up with what we call our house habits. These are our core values, but these are our core values in action. And let me just go through. We have 12 of them. And the first one is that we live on. We live on. It means that we are not going to get stuck. We are not going to stop. We will live on through pain. We will live on through adversity. We will live on through the challenge. We are going to live on. We talk about we love big. We love big. We don't want to be a church that loves small. We want to love big. Why? Because God loved big. The scripture says because God so loved the world. And so love is big love. And so we want to be like God, and we want to love big. We also want to protect unity. We don't want to allow gossip to come in. We don't want division coming in between our staff, our team, or anybody in our church. And so we have that core value, but we're going to put it into practice, and we're going to do that by making sure that we always protect unity. We're going to honor consistently. We aren't just going to honor at certain seasons or certain times. We're going to honor one another, not because maybe that person is deserving of honor, but we honor because we are honorable. It's the people that we want to be. And so we honor those individuals, and we do that consistently. We often talk about we lean in, because whenever we lean in, it puts us in the right posture. It puts us in the posture to be active in worship. It puts us in the posture to receive from the Word of God. So we want to lean into the presence of God. We want to lean in to the Word of God. We say that we want to grow intentionally. We grow intentionally because you don't grow accidentally, and you don't grow automatically. You only grow intentionally. We say we embrace discipline. We don't reject discipline. We don't run from discipline. We don't just accept discipline. We embrace discipline because we want to be the best we can be. We practice honesty. I personally believe it's one of the hardest things in life to do is to be honest with yourself. But we practice honesty. It's a core value that we put into action. So we practice honesty with ourselves, and we practice honesty with one another. Another house habit that we have is that we lead out. We lead out of who we are. We lead out of our character and our integrity. We lead out of what God has done in us, and we lead out into the community. John Maxwell says that if you think you're a leader, but you turn around and there's nobody following, you're only a man taking a walk. So we want to lead out into the community. We want to lead out of who we are, and that is a core value that we have. We also say that we give generously. We give generously. We don't want to hold back. We don't want to be greedy. We don't want to be stingy. When it comes time for us to give of our time, our talent, of our treasure, we want to give, and we want to give generously. We cheer enthusiastically. That is who we are. We don't do the little golf clap. We don't cheer politely. We cheer enthusiastically because we're excited about life. We're excited about what God is doing. It's a core value that's translated into a house habit. And finally, our last one, our 12th one, is that we stay on mission. We stay on mission. We don't get knocked off track. We don't get distracted. We will always stay on the mission that God has given us. So we took those 12 core values and we put them into practices, and we came up with what we call those house habits. They are the habits of our house. And now I just want to share with you 4 ways to effectively establish culture. 4 ways for you to effectively establish culture in your church, in your business, in your home. 4 ways for you to effectively establish culture. And here's the first one. The first is teach culture. Teach culture. You have to say it. You have to talk about it. You have to spell it out. You have to write it down so that people can read it. You have to teach culture. You may have heard it said before that some things are better caught than taught. And while that is true, I can tell you that I can catch it faster if you can define it and clarify it for me. Sure, you have to experience culture, but man, it sure is more effective when you can explain the culture that I am experiencing. You see, you have to put your culture into words. And this is so important because it helps your people talk about your church. And if you don't give them things to say where they can tell their neighbor about your church or tell their family member about your church, they're going to create their own words and their own identity and their own culture for your church. But you see, you don't want them to define your church. You want to define your church. You want to define the culture that is created. And the only way you can do that is whenever you teach culture. The second thing that you have to do is you have to emphasize culture. So first we have to teach culture, and then we have to emphasize culture. You see, you can't just teach people your culture or your house habits in some type of membership class or on a piece of paper that is hanging on your church bulletin board. You can't just post it there and expect them to get it. No, you have to teach it, but then you have to emphasize it, and then you have to overemphasize it. And about the time that you get tired of talking about your core values, of talking about those house habits, of talking about your culture, when you don't want to hear another word, that's just the beginning when people are finally starting to get it. You have to emphasize your culture, and you have to overemphasize that culture so that it can be created in your congregation. And one of the ways that we like to do that is we try to always mention one house habit every Sunday morning. Whether it goes along in the sermon or maybe you want to put it there in your introduction, we always want to try to introduce and remind people of one of our 12 house habits every Sunday morning. The first Wednesday of the year, of every month, as we go through the month, there are 12 months in the year, and so we have 12 house habits. So the first Wednesday, we teach a house habit every single month, and we just recycle those every year. And so from January to December, every first Wednesday, we are talking about one of our 12 house habits. And you say, well, man, can you talk about it too much? No way. You can never talk about culture. You can never talk about your house habits too much. If this is what we have determined that will cause us to be successful, then how can we talk about it too much? If we have to determine that these are the most important things to us fulfilling our vision and our mission, then how can we talk about those things too much? You see, you must get comfortable, not just with teaching it one time, but with emphasizing it over and over and over again. And then we get to the third point, and that is act culture. So you teach culture, you emphasize culture, and then you have to act culture. This goes beyond the classes that teach the culture and the website that clearly defines your core values. You see, you have to follow those things with action. You have to act out the culture on a daily basis. You see, your core values mean absolutely nothing if you don't live them out. You see, people appreciate culture that is defined, but people are challenged and they're changed by culture that is delivered. You see, it's important that you can define it, but you've got to be able to deliver it, because delivered culture is what transforms people's lives. You see, you can't say, well, we grow intentionally, but then you're not reading any books on leadership. You're not listening to any leadership podcasts. You're not putting books out there in front of your people. One of the things that we do at North Point Community Church is we have a book of the quarter. So we read through 4 books a year as an entire church, and encouraging everybody to join us on the journey. Why? Because we grow intentionally. It is a value. It is a house habit. And so we have to put it into practice, and we do that in these various ways. On Wednesday night, we have what we call Grow You classes. So we teach people about marriage. We teach people about finances. We teach people in a classroom setting how they can grow and how they can improve. Why? Because that's a house habit. We grow intentionally. You see, you can't say we cheer enthusiastically, but then whenever somebody gets a blessing next to you and you don't want to cheer for them because it's the same blessing that you got, or whenever you have a special guest in your church and they stand up to talk and to speak, and everybody just kind of gives them the little pat clap there. No, that's not living up to your core values. You got to put those things into practice. So whenever we have a guest speaker that comes to our platform, our people know that, man, this is a house habit. This is a core value. We cheer enthusiastically. We're going to cheer until the speaker tells us to stop, because that is the habit of the house. And so if you're going to have a core value and you're going to make it a practice, you have to actually live that out in your life. So you have to act culture. You see, what is said, if it's not matched up with what is seen, will become insignificant. If it's said but it's not seen, it will become insignificant. It doesn't matter how clever your core values are. It doesn't matter how catchy your house habits are. If people can't see it being lived out, those things will become insignificant. So we must act culture. So we teach culture, we emphasize culture, we act culture, and finally, we monitor culture. We must monitor culture. You see, there must be accountability to the culture. If the core values were worth making, then they are also worth monitoring. If they were worth making and you set all the time and all the dedication to come up with those core values and to create this culture, then it's worth monitoring. It's worth finding the heartbeat and the pulse to make sure that it is moving in the direction that you want it to move. You see, you've got to you got to pay careful attention to the culture. You've got to observe. You've got to be aware. You've got to keep your hand on the pulse of the organization. You can't just set up a culture and expect it to continue on and on and on year after year. That's not the way that it works. You can't call the church together at the beginning of the year and say, this is going to be our culture moving forward, and you have a wonderful Sunday and everybody's excited about it, and you set the culture, but you can't expect it to continue on because you had one good meeting or you had one Vision Sunday where you laid it out. No, it does not work that way, because here's the reason. You have new people that come into your church, and they bring a culture with them. You have new problems that are creating new fears and new scenarios and new dilemmas in people's lives. You have new seasons. People start having children and all kinds of things. People are going through different seasons of life, and that's why you have to monitor culture, because things are always changing. And hey, I'm excited if you have a great vision day and everybody is thrilled about the house habits and they're excited about the core values and they're ready to create the culture. You must determine that you will monitor the culture every single day, every week, every month. You've got to keep your hand on the pulse of culture. And you see, if you take these 4 things that I gave you today, if you take the first letter of those 4 and you take the T for teach, and you take the E for emphasize, and you take the A for act, and you take the M for monitor, what do you come up with? You come up with team. You come up with team because every team has a culture, but the culture has the team. And if you will create a good culture, then you can have a great team. You can have a team of champions. You can fulfill the vision and the purpose of God for your life. But don't forget, it all is going to rise and fall on that culture. So teach culture, emphasize culture, act that culture out, monitor that culture, create a great team within that culture, and God is going to see you through. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us.